The drawer had been sticking for 2 years. 2 years of my wife asking, and me saying I'd get to it. Then, on a Tuesday in October, with the house empty, I got to it. I pulled it all the way out, turned it over, and there was a phone taped underneath. Cheap. Black. Buried in duct tape old under new, like somebody had been retaping it for years. I charged it. No password, no contacts, no messages. One photo, and the photo was of me. Somewhere I had never been. On a night I could prove I was somewhere else. Which meant my wife of 30 years wasn't hiding an affair, she was hiding a case. And the case was against me. My name's Ray, I'm 63. I live in Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of town where the girl at the grocery knows how you take your coffee before you open your mouth, and the guy at the hardware store still writes it down in a book. I ran a heating and air business here for 34 years. Ray's Heating and Air. My name on the truck, my name on the invoice, my name stitched over the pocket of every shirt I owned. I sold it 4 years ago to 2 of my best guys, and I kept a key and that little office upstairs because you don't just walk away from 34 years. You back out of it slow. Like a driveway in the snow. I married Diane 30 years ago. She was 31, I was 33. She had this way of listening to a man, like whatever he was saying was the only thing happening in the whole county. We bought the house on Poplar the next spring. 3 bedrooms, bad wiring, a maple out front that was a stick when we planted it, and now drops enough leaves to bury a Buick. We raised 2 kids in that house. Aaron's 28 now, married to a good man named Josh, and they've got a little boy, Owen, who just turned 3. Kyle's 25, down in Charlotte, doing something with software that has been explained to me 4 separate times. 30 years, 2 kids, 1 mortgage, 1 maple tree. That's the resume. Now, I need you to understand something, and if you don't understand this part, none of the rest of it is going to land right. I was not an unhappy man. I want to be honest about that because it would be easier to sit here and tell you I was miserable. I wasn't. I had a good marriage. That's what I'd have told you. That's what I told everybody. But if you'd pushed me, if you'd sat me down at the end of a long day, put a cold beer in my hand, and really pushed, I'd have told you there was about 3 feet of hallway in my marriage I was never once able to cross. Little things, that's all. Nothing you could point at. She'd flinch, just for half a second, if I came up behind her at the sink. 30 years, and she never got used to it. She'd ask me where I'd been, I'd say work, and she'd say, okay. And that okay had a floor in it, something underneath, and I never found the trapdoor. Not in 30 years. And here's the one that took me the longest to notice. Because it took about 8 years for me to realize it was even happening. In 30 years of marriage, I never once saw my wife fall asleep before me. Not one time. She'd wait me out. Every single night of her life. I thought she was a night owl. I used to make jokes about it at cookouts. So somewhere around year 8, I made a decision. The way men do. Quietly. Alone. Without telling anybody. I decided that this was just who she was. And that if there was a problem in the house, the problem was. For 30 years, I carried a small, quiet idea around in my chest. And the idea was, I'm not quite enough for her. Something about me doesn't land. And I loved her anyway. I stayed. I fixed her mother's mantel clock twice. I sat in the parking lot for every one of her scans. I never, not one time, not for 1 minute, thought about leaving. I just lived with it. The way you live with a bad knee. You don't complain about it, you just stop taking the stairs. And then there's Dale. I have to tell you about Dale because none of this makes any sense without him. Dale and I met when we were 19, hauling shingles for a roofer who paid cash and yelled a lot. Been friends ever since. 44 years. He stood up at my wedding. He's godfather to both my kids. He's the one who drove me home the night one of my guys, Wade, dropped dead in a customer's basement, and I was the one who found him. Dale drove. I don't remember the drive. Every Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, corner booth at Duffy's, down on Main, same booth, same 2 coffees. 30 years. Rain, snow, Christmas, everything. If you'd stopped me on the sidewalk the week before I turned that drawer over and said, Ray, who's the best friend you ever had? I wouldn't have had to think about it. I'd have said his name before you finished the question. Remember that. Please. Remember I said that. So, October. Diane's sister Bev, up in Toledo, had her hip done. Diane packed a bag to go help her for 8 days, sat there in the driveway with the window down, telling me to eat something green. Then she backed out, and she was gone, and the house got very, very quiet. You know what nobody tells you about a quiet house? It starts talking. Second day in, I'm wandering around noticing things I hadn't actually looked at in 20 years. Which brings me to the dresser. It was her grandmother's. Walnut. Came out of Pennsylvania on a train in 1911, and Diane loved that thing more than she loved most people. and the bottom drawer stuck. Bad. You had to grab it with both hands and rock it, and it came out crooked and mean. For a solid year, she asked me to fix it. Ray the drawer. Ray whenever you get a chance, and I'd say, I'll get to it, which is a thing men my age say that means absolutely nothing. And then, about a year ago, she stopped asking. And here's the thing. That's the part that got to me. Not the asking. The stopping. Because a woman who stops asking is a woman who's given up on you. So on that Tuesday, with rain coming down the windows and nobody in the house, I went upstairs with a screwdriver and a bar of soap for the runners. I was going to fix that drawer, and she was going to come home Sunday and open it, and it was going to slide like glass, and she'd look at me, and for about 4 seconds, I'd get to be a man who fixes things. That's why I did it. I want that on the record. I did it to make my wife happy. I got the drawer out and set it on the bed, and right away I could see the problem. Because the drawer wasn't the problem. Something was stuck to the underside of it. A hump. A knot of gray tape about the size of a paperback book, built up so thick it dragged on the frame every time she pulled. That's what had been sticking for 2 years. Not the wood. I stood there with my hand on it. Because I already knew. You know how you know? I already knew. I picked at the edge and started peeling, and it came off in layers. That's what I keep coming back to. Layers. Fresh tape on top, gray and stretchy. Under that, older tape, dried out, gone tan at the edges. Under that, older still, so brittle it cracked like a dead leaf. Somebody had been taking that off and putting it back for a long, long time. And in the middle of it, wrapped up in there like something in a nest, was a phone. Little black slab, scuffed half to death. Not her phone. Her phone was in her purse in Toledo. This was one of those cheap ones you buy at a gas station with cash. I carried it down to the kitchen. Found a charger in the junk drawer. Plugged it into the outlet over the counter. The one by the coffee maker, where the two of us had stood 1,000 mornings. And I watched a little white battery come up on the screen. Took 9 minutes. I know, because I stood there the whole time. Didn't sit down. Didn't move. It came on. No password. It just opened, like it had been waiting. No contacts, no messages, no apps, nothing. One photo, I tapped it, and it was my truck. My old white service truck, the one I drove for 11 years, parked at the curb in front of a 2-story house with a porch light burning and a chain-link fence and a hedge that needed cutting. And I have never in my life seen that house. I stood there in my own kitchen, trying to make it mean something. Some part of my brain going, okay, there's a reason, there's always a reason. And then I saw the little orange date stamped down in the corner. And everything stopped. Because I knew exactly where I was that night. At that hour, at that minute, and it wasn't there. October 22nd, 2004, 11:52 at night. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to count backward or check a calendar or ask anybody, because that date isn't a date to me. It's a room. It's a smell. It's a sound I still hear sometimes when a radiator kicks on. At 11:52 on the night of October 22nd, 2004, I was 90 miles north of my own kitchen, in room 11-8 at Riverbend Care Center in Sandusky, Ohio, holding my father's hand while he died. His name was Walter. He was 78. Emphysema, 40 years of camels and 20 years of ductwork, and the two of them got him in the end. He'd been at Riverbend 11 weeks. I drove up every Sunday and every Wednesday, and not last week I just stopped leaving. I can still tell you what that room looked like. Vinyl recliner, the color of a Band-Aid. A TV bolted to the ceiling with the sound off. A radiator under the window that clanked twice and then hissed, twice and then hissed all night long. There was a night nurse named Ruth Ann, who kept bringing me coffee in a styrofoam cup that I never once drank. And every hour or so she put her hand on my shoulder on her way out and never say anything. And honestly, that was the kindest thing anybody's ever done for me. He hadn't spoken since Tuesday. Not a word, just that breathing. And then a little after midnight, he squeezed my hand, and he said, "Is it raining?" And it was. It had been raining since noon, so I leaned over and I said, "Yeah, Dad, it's raining pretty good." 4 words. That was it. That's the last thing my father ever said to me, and it was about the weather, and I have thought about it every single day for 22 years. He died at 2:15 in the morning. I signed the paperwork at 10 after 4. I got home to Poplar Street a little before 6, and Diane was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with her coat on, because she'd been up all night with Aaron, who was 6 and had strep, and when I came through that door she stood up and put her arms around me, and neither one of us said anything for a long time. She's the one who told the kids. She's the one who called the funeral home. She picked out the casket because I couldn't stand up in that room. She wrote 140 thank you notes by hand, and she got the spelling right on every single one. So understand me. October 22nd is not a number to my wife. It's not a number to anybody in my family. And it was sitting right there in the corner of that picture, in little orange letters, and it had been sitting there the entire time. Now here's the second thing that hit me, and this one took a little longer, because I had to get my hands to stop shaking first. My truck wasn't with me that night either. The alternator had been going for about 2 weeks. It'd throw the light on you at a stoplight and then act fine for a day, and I kept meaning to swap it and kept not doing it. I'm sensing a theme in my life, you know? And that Thursday, when the call came from Riverbend that I better come, I did not get in that truck. I was not going to break down on the turnpike at midnight on my way to watch my father die, so I took Diane's Taurus. And the truck stayed at the shop on Reeves Road. Sat in that gravel lot with the keys hanging on the pegboard inside the back door, right where every key hung for 34 years. Because that's how it was done and nobody ever thought twice about it. Which means somebody drove my truck to a house in a town I've never been to on the night my father died, and there were 5 keys to that back door. Mine, Wade's, Tony's, Junior's, and Dale's. Because Dale borrowed my sheet metal brake about once a month for 20 years and I got tired of driving down there to let him in, so I had a key cut for him back in, 98, 99. So there's your list. And I want you to notice something. I want you to notice that I just said that man's name out loud and kept right on talking. Like it was nothing. Like it was a fact about a pegboard. Hold on to that. Because I'm going to come back to it. And when I do, I want you to remember that I stood in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning in October and said Dale's name in a list of 5, and it didn't slow me down for 1 second. That's how good he was, okay? So now I've got a picture, and I've got nothing else in the whole world. Problem is, it's on one of those old phones. Screen the size of a matchbook. You can't pinch it, you can't zoom it, you can't do a thing with it. So I did what a 63-year-old man does. I took a picture of the picture. Held my own phone over that little screen, snapped it, and then I sat down at the kitchen table and I zoomed in on it inch by inch like a man reading a map with a magnifying glass. And I started pulling things out of that frame. The truck, my truck. You could read the door. Ray's Heat and Air, and the phone number under it. The old number with the 419. The house. 2 stories, pale siding, gone gray in that light. Porch light burning yellow over a screen door. Chain link fence with a gate hanging a little crooked. Hedge along the front that hadn't been touched in a season, and on the porch, up against the railing, there was a bike, a little one, kid-sized, purple maybe or blue, couldn't tell, and in the neighbor's yard, stuck in the grass on a wire stake, one of those cheap plastic signs. And I zoomed until it went to mush and then backed it off 1 click, and I could read it. Fenwick S-teen block, watch. I sat back in that chair and I said the word out loud in an empty kitchen. Fenwick. Then I got out an envelope from the junk mail pile, and I wrote it on the back, and under it I started making a list of every town in Ohio I could think of. Because I had a street, and a street's not much, but it's not nothing either. Quick thing before I keep going. If you're still with me, subscribe, hit like, and tap that bell so the next one finds you. Okay, back to my kitchen, because that's when my phone rang. Face down on the counter, buzzing against the tile, and I turned it over, and it said, Diane, I want you to sit in that with me for a second. My hand on the counter, her name lit up, and 9 inches away, plugged into the wall, that ugly little black phone with my truck on the screen. I answered it. I don't know why. Reflex, I guess. 30 years of reflex. And she was fine. That's the part. She was completely, totally fine. Beb's making a pot roast that's too big for 2 people. The physical therapist came at 10 and made her walk to the mailbox, and she complained the whole way. Did you eat? Ray, did you eat anything today? And don't say cereal. And I said cereal. And she laughed. She actually laughed at me over the phone from 2 hours away. And then, right at the end, right before we hung up, she said, You sound funny. And I said, I'm fine, just tired. And she said, okay. And there it was, that okay, with the floor in it. 30 years I'd been standing on that floor. 30 years I'd heard that word come out of that woman like a door closing at the far end of a hallway. And I'd never once wondered what was underneath it, because I'd already decided the problem was me. Now I knew there was a room down there. I just had no idea how big it was. I hung up, and I stood there, and then it landed on me. I hadn't told her. She'd been on the line for 11 minutes, and I never said, hey, funny thing, I found a phone taped under your grandmother's dresser. 30 years, and I never kept a thing from that woman. Not a dollar, not a night, not a thought worth having. And I just hung up holding the biggest thing that ever happened to me and said nothing. And here's what scared me. It wasn't hard. It was the easiest thing I ever did in my life. I went back up those stairs. And I turned that drawer over one more time. And this time I actually looked at it instead of looking at what came off of it. That knot of tape wasn't one shape, it was two. There was a little pocket where the phone had been. Sure. But right beside it, down in the oldest layers, the ones gone brown and hard, there was an outline of something else. A rectangle. Long and flat and about the size of a hardback book, but thinner. You could see where it had pressed itself into that tape over years and years, like a boot print in dried mud. And the tape around it hadn't been torn. It had been cut, clean, with scissors. And the cut edge was still shiny. She left on a Saturday morning. She took a suitcase, a garment bag, and her own pillow, because she can't sleep on Bev's pillows. And she took one more thing. Something she'd kept taped to the underside of her grandmother's dresser for God knows how long. Something she could not leave alone in this house for 8 days. With me in it, she was coming home Sunday, which gave me 5 days to find out what my wife of 30 years thought I had done. 5 days, and I want to tell you what I did with the first night of them. Nothing, not one thing. I sat in that kitchen until it got dark, and then I sat in it after it got dark, and I never turned on a light. Just me and the hum of the refrigerator and that little black phone lying face up on the table with my truck glowing on the screen every time I woke it up, which was about every 90 seconds, because part of me kept thinking it'd be gone, that I'd made it up, that I'd look down and there'd just be a phone. It never went away. And somewhere around 3 a.m, sitting in the dark in my own house, I did the arithmetic. And that's when it really got me. Not the picture, the arithmetic. We got married in 96. Year 8 is 2004. Everything I'd been carrying, the flinch at the sink, the okay with the floor in it, the woman who would not fall asleep before I did, every single bit of it started the year my father died. 30 years I'd been calling that just how Diane is. 30 years I'd been telling myself it was something in her wiring. And it wasn't. It had a start date. It had a month. And I'd been living on top of it like a man building a deck over a sinkhole. I want you to understand what that does to a person. Because for 22 years, in the quietest part of myself, I believed I wasn't quite enough for my wife. I built around that. I made peace with it. I gave up things because of it and never told a soul. And it turned out I'd been apologizing silently every day for 22 years for something I didn't do. I'll be honest with you. There was a stretch that night, maybe 20 minutes, where I was so far past scared I came out the other side into something almost calm. And in that 20 minutes, I picked up my phone, and I pulled up a number I'd had memorized since 1983, and I hit it. It rang once, and I hung up, not because I suspected him. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters. It did not cross my mind, not one time. I hung up because I couldn't figure out how to say it out loud yet. Because the second I said I found a phone taped under my wife's dresser, it'd be real, and it'd be out in the world, and it'd be a thing my best friend knew about my wife. I hung up to protect her. And here's the thing. I found out later he saw it. One ring at 3 a.m. shows up. He saw it, and he never called back, and he never mentioned it, not that Sunday, not ever. 44 years. And if I hung up on that man, he'd call me back inside of 90 seconds, just to say something smart. Not that night. All right. Wednesday, I stopped being a husband and started being a service tech. That's the only way I know how to explain it. 34 years. When something's broken, you don't stand there feeling about it. You isolate the fault. You test the easy things first. You write down what you find. So I made a list on the back of that envelope, and item 1 was Fenwick. Took me most of the morning because I'm 63 and the computer, and I have an understanding where I don't rush it and it doesn't embarrass me. But I found 4 Fenwick streets in the state of Ohio. One was in Cincinnati, 4 hours away, and it was a block of condos that went up in 2015. Out. One was in a little place down by Marietta, ran the pictures, wrong houses, all brick, all 1 story, out. One up near Cleveland, and it was 6 lanes wide and had a Walgreens on it, out. And one was in Ashford, Ohio, population 9,000 and change, 41 miles from my kitchen table. Little factory town with a shut-down factory, the way half of them are. I'd driven past the exit for that place probably 400 times in my life, and never once taken it. And I pulled up the street, and I started walking down it, click by click, 1 house at a time, like a man going door to door. And 40 minutes in, there it was. 1841 Fenwick. They put new siding on it, pale green now, instead of that gray. The hedge was gone, dug out, grass grown over where it had been. But it was the same house, same 2 stories, same porch, same railing, same little roof over the steps, and the chain link fence was still there, same crooked gate. I zoomed in on that gate for a long, long time. And there's a spot at the curb, right in front, between the gate and the neighbor's driveway, where a truck would sit exactly the way my truck sat in that picture. Now, let me ask you something. Because I've thought about this a lot since. What would you have done right then? Because I've had people tell me, good people, Ray, I'd have gotten in the car and driven straight up there. And maybe you would. But I'll tell you why I didn't. Because I was terrified that I'd knock on that door and a woman would open it and she'd look at my face and she'd know me. Because I'd already started doing the thing you do. I'd started wondering if I was crazy. If there was some week in 2004 I'd lost. If a man can do something and lock it up so tight it doesn't exist for him anymore. That's what 22 years of somebody else's story does to you. It gets in your foundation. You start checking your own walls. So, no, I didn't drive to Ashford. Not yet. I drove to Reeves Road instead. The shop looks exactly the same. Tony and Junior kept the sign, kept the color, kept the crooked gravel where the water sits in the spring. Tony was up front on the phone with somebody about a heat pump, and he waved me through like I still worked there, which, God bless him, he always does, and I went up the back stairs into that attic. Now, I need to tell you one thing about me, and it's going to matter more than anything else in this entire story. In 1991, I got audited. I was 38, I had 2 trucks and a bad shoebox system, and a man from the government sat across from me for 6 hours and made me sweat through a shirt. It cost me $11,000 and about a year off my life. And when it was over, I drove to the office supply and I bought a case of hardbound mileage logs. And from that day until the day I sold that business, there was a logbook in the door pocket of every single truck. Every run, every date. Odometer out, odometer in ink. 34 years of them, boxed by year. In that attic, I found 2004, truck 2, my white one. Pulled it out, and the cover was soft as cloth, and it smelled like hot dust and mildew, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to set it down on the floor and kneel over it like a man praying. October 21st, 2 calls, both mine, both my handwriting, ends at 141,026. 22nd, the day my father started to go, there's an entry, and it says, shop, no runs, odometer 41,000-2026, 23rd, 24th, blank. Funeral was the 26th. I didn't touch a truck for 8 days. Monday the 25th, Tony took it out on a service call. Tony's block letters, I'd know them anywhere. And Tony wrote his starting number down, 41,292. I want you to sit with that, because I sat with it on a plywood floor for about 10 minutes without moving. That truck went 86 miles with nobody driving it. Millbrook to Ashford is 41. Round trip is 82. Leaves you 4 miles to find a street, park, sit, and get out. 86. But that's not what put me on the floor. That's not it. It's that somebody wrote in my book. You understand? A guy borrowing a truck just takes the truck. He doesn't crack a log and write shop, no runs and copy the last odometer forward so the numbers line up. That's not borrowing. That's a man covering his tracks in a book he knew I'd open, which means he knew about the book. He knew where the keys hung. He knew I was 90 miles north. He knew I wouldn't be back for a week and wouldn't be checking mileage when I got back because I'd be busy burying my father. And he knew that eventually somebody might come looking. I held that page up to the window light. And the handwriting was not mine. It wasn't Wade's. Wade wrote like a doctor. It wasn't Tony's blocks. It wasn't Junior's, because Junior was 19 years old and dotted his I's with circles like a girl, and we never let him hear the end of it. It was small and slanted hard to the right. And the S's came off the pen like little fishhooks. And I'd seen that handwriting my whole life. I sat there on that floor in my own attic, staring at 3 words, and I could not place it. I got in the car, drove home, made a sandwich I didn't eat. And it wasn't until Thursday night, after the worst and best day of my life, that I finally remembered where I'd seen those little fishhooks before. And when I did, I threw up in my own driveway. But Thursday didn't start with that. Thursday started at 4 a.m, standing in my kitchen in the dark, waiting on a pot of coffee I didn't even want. I hadn't slept. I want to be accurate about that. I hadn't slept Tuesday either. So by Thursday, I was somewhere around hour 50 of being awake. And I was at that stage where your hands don't feel all the way attached to you. I'd spent Wednesday night trying to place that handwriting. Sat at the table with a photocopy of that log page, because I'd run it on Tony's machine before I left, twice, and put one copy in the glove box and put the other under the seat, and I could not have told you why. I just knew that page was the only thing standing between me and a version of my life I did not want to live in. Small letters, hard right slant, fishhook S's, And I knew it. That's the thing that was making me crazy. It wasn't a stranger's hand. It sat right there in my chest like a name you can't say, all the way up, right on the edge, and it would not come. You know that feeling? Where the harder you press, the deeper it goes. So around 4, I quit pressing. I made the coffee, and I got in the car, and I drove to Ashford. Route 9, in the dark, 41 miles. I was on Fenwick Street before 6 in the morning, and I parked 3 houses down and shut the engine off and just sat there. Sun came up around 7:20. And that street woke up around me like I wasn't there. A man came out in a bathrobe for his paper. A woman 2 doors down rustled a car seat into a minivan. A dog barked at me for a solid 10 minutes and then decided I wasn't worth it. And there it was, 1841. And I want to tell you what I felt, and I can't, because what I felt was nothing. Flat, gray, hollow nothing. Because it was a house. That's all. Somebody's house. There was a garden hose coiled on a hanger by the spigot. There was a mat by the door that said welcome on it in curly letters. And that's what got me. Not horror. The opposite. That whatever happened there was so small and so ordinary that it could sit on a street for 22 years and every car that went by would never know a thing. I never opened the door. 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I never got out. Because there was a car in the driveway. Somebody lived in there now. And I couldn't make myself walk up the steps and say the sentence I was carrying. Listen. Before I take you into what came next. If this story has got its hooks in you, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a like, tap the bell so the next one finds you. All right. 9 o'clock. Because at 9 o'clock, the Ashford Public Library opened. 1 story, brick, put up sometime in the 60s. And I walked up to the desk and I asked a woman about 35 years old for the local paper for October of 2004. And she winced a little, like she was apologizing, and she said, "The Beacon? Oh, that's all microfilm." And I said that's fine, because of course it's microfilm. And 63 years old, I learned on microfilm. She set me up in the back, threaded the reel for me. And when that lamp came on, I got hit with the smell I hadn't smelled since I was a kid in a school library. Warm dust and machine oil. And for about 4 seconds I was 12. October 2004 came up in front of me and it was so ordinary it hurt. A school levee. A corn maze. A picture of the marching band at a home game. And I cranked forward, slow, October 25th, page 3, bottom left corner, 4 column inches, which is what a life is worth, in a town that size on a Monday. Ashford woman, 34, found dead in home. Her name was Nora. She was 34 years old. She was found Saturday morning, October 23rd, at her residence in the 1800 block of Fenwick Street by a family member. Police said there was no indication of foul play. Cause of death was consistent with a fall. She was a dental assistant. She'd worked at the same office for 9 years. She was survived by her mother and by a daughter aged 7. That's it. That's the entire thing. And I sat there with my hand still on that crank. Because look at the dates. Look at them. That photo was taken Friday night, 11:52. She was found Saturday morning. My truck was sitting at that curb, and a few hours later, that woman was dead inside that house. I don't know how long I sat there. The reel ran off the end and started flapping around the spool, and the woman came back and shut it off for me and asked if I was all right, and I said allergies, and she said, sure, kindest possible way, which told me she'd seen a lot of men lie in that chair. I got out to my car and I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and now I'm going to tell you the thing I have never said out loud to another human being. And it's not a nice thing. Sitting in that parking lot, I started to wonder if I did it. That's what it does to you. That's what 22 years of somebody else's fear does when you've been sleeping next to it. It gets in, it gets under your floor, and it starts prying up boards. And I sat there and I thought, what if there's a night in me I put away somewhere? What if the reason my wife flinches at the sink is the same reason my hands won't hold still, 63 years old, and I was afraid of myself. So I got on the highway and I drove north, 126 miles, 2 hours and change, never turned the radio on once. And Riverbend was still standing, new sign out front, same brick, same green awning I used to shake the rain off under. And I walked into that lobby for the first time in 22 years, and the carpet was different and everything else was exactly the same. There was a girl at the desk, maybe 25, and I said, I'm not here to see anybody. My father died here in 2004. I need to know if you still have the old visitor logs. She looked at me the way you look at a man who's gotten lost. She got her supervisor. Woman named Marguerite, mid-50s, reading glasses up in her hair. And she started in on the thing they have to say, sir, we can't release medical records without. And I said, I don't want records. I just want to know if I was here. And she stopped, and she really looked at me. And she said, sit down, hun. 40 minutes I sat in that lobby. And then she came back through the double doors carrying a cardboard box with dust an eighth of an inch thick on the lid, and she set it on that counter, and she said there was a lawsuit in '09. We haven't thrown anything out since 1998. It's all in the basement, and it drives me out of my mind every day of my life. And she opened it right there in front of me. A spiral book with a marbled cover, October 22nd, 2004. And I turned that page with a hand I did not recognize as mine. Fourth line down, blue ballpoint. My name, my own handwriting, 4:40 p.m., room 1 at 8. Visiting, Walter. And in a sign-out column, nothing. Blank. Because I never signed out. Because I never left. And then Marguerite pulled out one more sheet. And she said, "This is what you actually want. The hourly check sheet. Room 11-8. Every hour, all night, a nurse walks in and initials a line. 11 p.m., initialed RK resting. Sun at bedside. Midnight, no change. Sun at bedside, sun at bedside. I read those 3 words about 9 times. 11 o'clock. And midnight. And that picture was taken at 11:52, 126 miles south of where I was standing. And no man who ever lived drives 126 miles in 8 minutes. And I stood in the middle of that lobby, 63 years old, and I cried like I have not cried in my adult life, right there in front of a stranger. And Marguerite came around that counter and put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say one word, just like Ruth Ann used to. She copied it for me. 3 pages, in a manila envelope. And she told me Ruth Ann retired in 2019, lives over in Port Clinton, and that she'd remember me, because Ruth Ann remembers all of them. And at the door she said, "I don't know what this is about, mister. But whatever it is, you were here." I got home at 10 after 9 at night, raining again. And I sat in my own driveway with the engine off and that envelope on the seat beside me. And I want to tell you, I felt good. It's a sick thing to say. But I did. I was lit up. I wasn't crazy. I was where I said I was. I was holding my father's hand. And then, sitting there in the dark, I thought about the funeral. Because I'd been living inside October of 2004 for 14 straight hours, and I thought about the cards, 140 of them. Diane answered every one by hand. And there was one card, one, out of 140, that I read maybe 40 times and kept in my sock drawer for a year, because it was the only one in that whole pile that sounded like a person instead of a greeting card. And I could see it. Right there on my windshield in the rain, I could see it. Small letters, slanted hard to the right, and every single S coming off that pen like a little fishhook. Dale wrote that card on the 26th of October, 4 days after. I got the door open just in time. And when I could finally stand up straight, I didn't call the police, I didn't call my wife. I went inside, I washed my face, and I sat down at that kitchen table and looked at the calendar stuck to the side of the refrigerator. It was Thursday. And Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, corner booth at Duffy's, that man was going to be sitting across from me with 2 coffees. Same as 1,000 Sundays, except this time, I was going to bring something with me. Trouble was, what I had wasn't a thing yet. It was a feeling with a slant to it. And a man does not blow up 44 years on a feeling. I needed that card. Now, you have to understand something about Diane. She keeps everything. Not in a sick way, not boxes to the ceiling. In an organized way. Top shelf of the hall closet, photo boxes, and a strip of masking tape on the end of each one with her handwriting on it. I stood on a kitchen chair Friday morning and went down that row with my finger. And the one I wanted said, Dad, 2004. Dad, not Walter, not Ray's father. Dad. I stood on that chair holding a cardboard box, and I read that one little word about 6 times. Because a woman who's afraid of you doesn't call your father Dad. And a woman who loves you doesn't tape a phone under her grandmother's dresser. And there it was. The thing I'd spend the next 3 days trying to hold in 2 hands at the same time. The cards were in a gallon freezer bag. All of them. Doves and lilies and folded hands and 140 little squares of careful cursive. The funeral home sent one. The bank sent one. 34 years of customers sent them. People whose furnaces I'd fixed it to in the morning, writing to a man they only ever saw in a work shirt. I sat at that table and went through them one at a time, and about 2/3 down, there it was. Plain white card. Drugstore. No dove. No verse. Nothing on the front at all. I kept it in my sock drawer for about a year, and then one day I put it back in the box with the rest, because that's what you do. You put it away. I can tell it to you from memory. Here's what it said. Ray, I keep starting this and it keeps coming out stupid, so here's what I've got. Summer of '82, your dad climbed a ladder in 95 degrees to bring us lunch on that roof on Vine Street, and he wouldn't leave till we ate it in front of him. He called me the other one for 6 years. Never did learn my name. I loved him. You were there at the end. Most men don't get that, and most fathers don't get it either. You were exactly where you were supposed to be. Don't let anybody tell you different. Dale. In 2004, that was the kindest thing anybody said to me. Out of 140. It's the only one that sounded like a person. I sat there Friday morning, 63 years old, and I read it again. And it was the coldest sentence I have ever seen come out of a human hand. Don't let anybody tell you different. He wasn't comforting me. He was building a wall and showing me which side to stand on. Stay in that room, Ray. Stay by that bed. Don't go looking. And he already knew. Sitting there with a drugstore card and a pen, 4 days after, he already knew he was the anybody. Stupid. Supposed. Anybody. Every S came off that pen like a little hook. I unfolded the photocopy and laid it down beside it. Shop, no runs. Same hook, same hard right lean, same tight little letters, like a man trying to take up as little room as possible. It wasn't close. It wasn't a maybe. It was the same hand, 22 years apart, sitting in my own house the entire time, on a shelf, 9 feet from where I brush my teeth. And I didn't cry. That's what gets me now, looking back. I got calm. Terribly, terribly calm. Like a man who's just found the short in the wiring, and now it's only a matter of work. He never missed a Sunday. 30 years. And I used to say that out loud like it was something to be proud of. Dale and me, 30 years, never missed a Sunday, rain or shine. People would smile at that. Older fellas especially. They'd say, "That's rare, Ray." It is rare. I always thought that man came every week because he loved me. He came every week because he was checking his own work. Now let me ask you something. And I want the hard answer, not the easy one. If you found out this morning that the best friend you've had since you were 19 years old had done this to you, how far back would you go? Where would you even start? Because I tried. I sat there Friday and I went through 44 years looking for the seam, the one day, the one look. The one thing I should have caught. There isn't one. There's no seam. That man was better at being my friend than most people are at anything they do for a living. And that's the part you don't get over. Because if that was fake, then what isn't? Around 1:40, I called the Ashford Police Department. Non-emergency line. Young guy. Polite. Real polite, which somehow made it worse. He put me on hold and came back and said, "Sir, I'm showing that one closed. Cause of death, fall. There's nothing active on it." And then he said, "You're welcome to come in and make a statement if you'd like." And I heard myself. That's what did it. I heard myself, out loud, in my own kitchen, saying the words, "There's a phone taped under my wife's dresser to a kid who probably wasn't born yet in 2004. I hung up. Because it wasn't a case. It was a story an old man was telling. I had 3 pieces of paper and a phone from a gas station. What I needed was a person. Quick thing, if you've made it this far with me, hit subscribe, leave a like, and switch that bell on so the next one comes and finds you. All right. The obituary. Because the news brief never gave me her last name. 4 column inches doesn't have room for a last name, apparently. The obituary did. Nora Dunleavy, 34, of Ashford. And it was long. Somebody who loved her wrote it, you can always tell. It said she worked at the same dental office on Locust Street for 9 years and never took a sick day. It said she made her own Halloween costumes. And it said she loved to sing but wouldn't do it in front of anybody. That's the line that took my legs out. Some mother sat down 4 days after burying her only daughter and put that in the paper. Because, out of everything she knew, that was the truest thing. Survived by her mother, Wilma Dunleavy, of Ashford, and by her daughter Cassie, age 7. Now, here's the thing about people my age and up. We're still in the phone book, Wilma Dunleavy, Ashford, Ohio. A landline she's probably had since Nixon. She'd be 81 now, if she was still there, if she was still anywhere. I wrote her address on the back of that same envelope, right under where I'd printed Fenwick, and I looked at it a long time, and I did not call. You don't call an 81-year-old woman on the telephone and say what I had to say. You knock. You stand on her porch in the daylight and let her look at your face and decide for herself. Saturday. I'd go Saturday. Diane called at 7:40. Bev's doing her exercises. There was a whole thing about a casserole dish that belonged to somebody's church, and I closed my eyes and let her talk, and for about 4 minutes it was just my wife's voice in my ear, and I was the happiest I'd been all week. I want you to know that. Even then. Even holding what I was holding. And then I did something stupid. I said, real casual, real light, "Hey, do we still have the cards from Dad's funeral?" And the line went quiet. Not a pause. Not a, "let me think." Quiet. 3 seconds. 4. I could hear a TV going in another room of Bev's house. And then she said, "Why?" Flat. No question mark on it. Just, "Why?" And I said, "No reason. Aaron asked about them. which was a lie, and it was the first real one I ever told that woman in 30 years, and it came out of me smooth as water off a hood. She said she had to go, and she hung up. And I sat there in the dark with the phone in my hand, and I understood something that made my scalp go cold. She'd just reached for that drawer, from 2 hours away. In her head, she'd already gone up those stairs. 9:40. Rain had come back hard, and headlights swung into my driveway. I knew them before they finished the turn. You know a man's headlights after 11 years? His sit a little low on the left because he caught a mailbox in 2015 and never had it squared up, and I gave him hell about it for a decade. And on my kitchen table, in a neat little row, under the light where anybody could see them, a phone, a white card, and a photocopy of a page out of a mileage log. I had about 11 seconds. And then I heard my storm door open, because Dale doesn't knock. I don't remember deciding. That's the truth. My hands just went. Card in the envelope in the drawer with the tape and the takeout menus, photocopy folded twice and jammed in my back pocket. Phone off the table and into the fruit bowl under 2 bananas and a pear that had been going soft since Tuesday. And I turned around and got the fridge open and had my head in it just as his shoes hit the mat. Ray? In here. And there he was. Rain on his shoulders, ball cap in his hand, hair flat where the cap had been. 64 years old. Same as he was Sunday, same as he was in 1979. And you know what he did? He went to the cabinet, the one over the dishwasher, got himself a glass, the same one he always took, and filled it at my sink without asking, because in 44 years he's never had to ask for anything in this house. And I stood there watching him drink my water with his back to me, and I thought, I could pick up that chair right now. And then he turned around and said, "You didn't answer your phone." I said the ringer was off. He looked at me. And here's what I want you to understand about this man. He didn't look at me like a guilty man looks at you. He looked at me the way he's looked at me my whole life. Steady. A little amused, like he was about to say something smart about my haircut. And he said, "You hung up on me Tuesday, 3 a.m. There it was. 2 days he sat on that. 2 days. And I said, real easy. Couldn't sleep. Fat finger. Went right back to bed. And he nodded. Slow. And he said, huh. And then he leaned back against my counter, crossed his arms, and asked me if Diane was still up in Toledo. I said Sunday. Sunday, he said. And he looked at the ceiling for a second, and then he said, big house when it's just you. That's it. That's all he said. Big house when it's just you. And 10 years ago, that's a nothing sentence. 10 years ago, that's just Dale being Dale at 9:40 at night. But I'd spent 4 days learning to read this man's handwriting. He wasn't making conversation. He was asking me what I'd been doing in it. He stayed 11 minutes. He talked about a transmission. He asked if I'd seen what they were charging for a sheet of plywood. He was funny, and I laughed. God help me. I actually laughed at something he said about his brother-in-law, and it came out of me real, because 44 years of laughing at a man doesn't shut off in 4 days. And the whole time, his eyes went around my kitchen. Not obvious. Just a lap, counter, table, chair, fruit bowl. He set the glass in my sink, and he put his cap back on, and at the door he stopped, with his hand on the frame, and he said, Sunday, 8 o'clock. You're buying. I got it last week. He got it last week. He'd gotten it last week for 30 years. And he was gone. And I stood in my kitchen, with my heart going like a bird in a box, and I thought, he knows. Not what. But he knows the ground moved. He'd come to my house at 9:40 at night in the rain to look at my face. And I'd showed him a man with his head in a refrigerator, lying about a fat finger. Saturday morning I drove to Ashford before the sun was all the way up. Wilma Dunleavy's house was a little yellow ranch about 6 blocks off Fenwick. Ramp built over the front steps, the good kind, somebody who cared built that. Plastic pumpkin on the porch. 3 weeks early, I sat at the curb for 20 minutes. Then I made myself get out. And I want to tell you what I was thinking on that walk up, because it's the only thing I'm proud of in this entire story. I was thinking, I do not want anything from this woman, not absolution, not proof. I wasn't going up there to save myself. I'd already been saved. I had 3 pages from a nursing home in my glove box. I was going up there because a 34-year-old woman who wouldn't sing in front of people had been dead for 22 years, and it was written down as a fall, and I had a photograph of my truck at her curb, and somebody in this world had to knock on this door. She opened it before I got to the top of the ramp. 81. Little. Cardigan. Oxygen line under her nose, tank on a cart, and the cart had tennis balls on the feet. And she looked up at me and she said, I swear to God, she said, you're not him. That's the first thing out of her mouth. to a stranger on her porch at 7 in the morning. I said, "Ma'am, my name's Ray. I don't think we've met." And she said, "I know we haven't. You're not him." And I said, "Who?" And she said, "Come inside. I'm not doing this in the yard." 22 years. That's what I couldn't get around, sitting in that little front room with the doilies and the picture of a girl on the wall. 22 years that woman had been carrying it, and she'd been ready to say it to whoever finally came. She had it loaded. Here's what she told me. And I'm going to tell it the way she told it, because she'd said it in her head about 100,000 times. Nora had a man. Nobody ever met him. Started sometime in '02, maybe '03. He never came to the door. He parked at the curb. He was married. Nora told her that much, once and never again, because Wilma made her feelings known, and after that they didn't discuss it. And that summer of '04, Nora tried to end it. Wilma said her daughter got scared. Wouldn't say of what. Changed the locks in August, and told her mother it was because of a break-in on the next block. And Wilma called around, and there was never any break-in on the next block. And she said Nora told her one thing, one time, in the car in a parking lot in September. She said, "If anything happens, it's his friend's truck, not his friend's." I sat in that chair and my ears rang, because Nora Dunleavy knew. She knew he was borrowing another man's truck. She knew there was somebody standing behind him, and she didn't know who I was. She never knew my name. But that woman looked out her window at Ray's Heating and Air on a door and understood exactly what it meant. It meant if it ever came apart, it came apart on me. And it did. Wilma told the police that in 2004, she told a detective named Prosser, who's dead now. She told him about the man, the truck, the locks, and he wrote it down. And it was a fall. Kitchen floor, back of the head, no forced entry, no marks. A 34-year-old woman who fell. And they never came back. And then she said, there was another one who came around, after. And I said, after what? After we buried her, she said, a woman. Late October, early November, a woman she'd never seen before, sitting in a car across the street, 2-3 times. And the third time, Wilma went out with a broom in her hand because she'd had enough, and the woman rolled her window down and started crying. Just came apart, sitting in a car in front of a dead girl's mother's house. And Wilma said, I asked her what she wanted. And the woman said, I need to know if it was him. And Wilma said, him who? And the woman said, my husband. And she drove away and she never came back. I couldn't get any air. And that little woman with the oxygen line looked across at me and said, that was your wife, wasn't it? I said, yes. And she said, I'm sorry, hun. And I said, for what? And she said, because she came here to find out if her husband killed my daughter. And she went home and she stayed with you anyway. And that's when it finally cracked open, all of it, right there in a stranger's front room. Diane found something. In October of 2004, my wife found something that pointed at me. I still didn't know what, and she got in her car and drove to a dead woman's mother's house to ask. And Wilma couldn't tell her, because Wilma never saw him. Nobody ever saw him. He parked at the curb for 2 years and never once came to the door. So my wife drove home to Poplar Street with nothing, no answer, and a husband asleep upstairs. And she stayed. 22 years, that woman lay down every night next to a man she was 90% sure was good. And 10% something she couldn't say out loud. She waited me out every night for 30 years. She flinched at the sink. And she stayed. She raised my kids with me. She wrote 140 thank you notes and called my father Dad on a piece of masking tape. She wasn't hiding an affair. She wasn't building a case to leave me. She was hiding the only piece of it she had, taped under her grandmother's dresser. Because 10% of her needed to keep it, and 90% of her couldn't bear to use it. That woman loved me so much, she carried a suspicion of murder for 22 years rather than lose me. And that's the thing I got wrong my entire adult life. All those years I thought I wasn't enough for her. I was too much. She bet her whole life on me being who I said I was. Every single day. Without proof. And she never once let it show in front of the kids. I asked Wilma one more thing before I left. I asked her what Nora's man drove. His own car. Not the truck. And she said she only saw it twice early on, before he got careful. And she said, it was one of those little sports cars. Black. The headlights sat crooked. I said, crooked how? And she said, the one on the left sat low, like it had been hit. I drove home from Ashford doing about 40 in a 55, with both hands on the wheel like a student driver, because I finally had it. All of it. Every piece. Except one. I still didn't know what my wife found. In October of 2004. The thing that put her in that car. The thing that made a woman like Diane drive to a stranger's house and ask if her husband was a murderer. And that thing wasn't in the tape anymore. She'd cut it out with scissors and taken it to Toledo in her suitcase. She'd be home in 24 hours. And 9 hours before that, I was going to sit down in a corner booth at Duffy's, across from a man I'd known for 44 years. And I finally knew what I was going to bring. I didn't sleep Saturday night. I didn't try. I sat at that kitchen table from about 11 at night until it started getting late, and I worked. That's the only word for it. I'd stopped being a husband on Tuesday. Somewhere in there, I'd stopped being a friend, too. What was left was a man with 34 years of diagnostics in his hands and a fault to isolate. Here's what I had. A photo of my truck at a dead woman's curb, 8 minutes before midnight, on a night I was 126 miles away with my hand on my father's. 3 pages from Riverbend that said son at bedside, initialed by a nurse, at 11 and at midnight. A logbook page in a hand that wasn't mine, saying shop. No runs, with an odometer copied forward, and a truck that went 86 miles with nobody in it. A sympathy card 4 days later, in that same hand, telling me not to let anybody tell me different. An 81-year-old woman in Ashford who'd been waiting 22 years for somebody to knock, who could put a man at that curb in a borrowed truck with a black car whose left headlight sat low, and a wife who'd known 10% of it since 2004 and had never once said it out loud. Now, what I did next, I've thought about a lot, because there's a version of this where I go straight to the Ashford police on Monday morning with all of it and let them do their jobs. But I'd already called them, and I'd heard what I sounded like on that phone. An old man with a photograph. I needed one thing they'd have to open a file on. I needed him to say it. So around 4 in the morning, I went out to the garage and got the little digital recorder out of my toolbox. The one I'd had since about 2011, that I used to use to talk myself through wiring diagrams, because I could never hold a schematic and a screwdriver at the same time. Fresh batteries. Tested it 3 times, set it in my shirt pocket behind the pens, and hit record before I got out of the car. And I want to say something here because people ask me. Ohio's a one-party state. I checked that Saturday night on my own computer, and I checked it twice. I'm allowed to record a conversation I'm sitting in. That's the law here. I wasn't trying to be clever. I just wasn't going to be the only man in that booth without proof. Duffy's, 8 o'clock, Sunday morning. He was already there. He's always already there. Corner booth, back to the wall, 2 coffees on the table. Mine set across from him with the spoon in it, because I take mine with something in it and he takes his black, and he's ordered for me since the 90s. And I sat down across from that man for the last time in my life. And I want to tell you what I felt. Not rage. I've been trying to find a word for it for a year now, and the closest I can get is grief. Because the man in that booth was the best friend I ever had. He was still, right that second, the best friend I ever had. And I was about to kill him. He said something about the Browns. I don't remember what. And I put my hand in my jacket, and I took out that folded photocopy of the log page, and I turned it around, and I slid it across the table, and I said, "Read that." He looked at it a long time, and then he sat back. And the strangest thing happened to that man's face. It went loose, like something let go behind it. 44 years of expression just came off, and he said, "Where'd you find that? Not what is this? Not what am I looking at? Where'd you find that?" And I said, "The attic." "Same place it's been." And he closed his eyes, and he said, "I told her he kept books. I told her that man wrote everything down, her." And I said, "Told who?" And he opened his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "Ray, don't." And I said, "Told who, Dale?" And there it was. 22 years, sitting between 2 coffees in a booth with duct tape on the seat. He said, "Nora." I said her name back to him. Nora Dunlevy, Fenwick Street. And that man flinched like I'd swung on him. And then he talked. God, he talked. Once it started coming out of him, it came out like a line let go, like he'd been holding a door shut with his shoulder for 22 years and finally just stepped away from it. 2 years, he said. It started at a job in '02. She was sweet, and it was easy, and Marlene was, and he stopped there, because even then, he couldn't say a bad word about his wife out loud in front of me, and that's how sick this thing was. And that summer, she wanted out, and he couldn't have out, because out meant it came home. Out meant Marlene and his girls and this town and every man in that diner. And I said, "So you took my truck?" And he said, "It wasn't like that." And I said, "It's a 41-mile drive, Dale. Both ways. 82 miles. Book says 86. And he said, and I will hear this until they put me in the ground. He said, "I didn't go up there to do anything." That's what he said. "I didn't go up there to do anything." He said he went to talk. He said she called him at his home, and Marlene answered, and he panicked. And he knew my truck was sitting at the shop because he knew where I was. He knew my father was dying. He'd sat in my kitchen 4 days before that and told me to go, and he'd meant it, and he'd taken my keys off a pegboard the same week, and he said they argued in that kitchen, and she was going to call his wife. And he grabbed her arm, and that's the word he used, grabbed. And he said she went back into the counter, and then she went down, and she didn't get up. And he sat there in that booth, and he said, it was an accident. And I said, you took a picture. And he stopped. Because that's the thing, isn't it? That's the whole thing. You don't take a picture by accident. He'd taken that picture at 11:52, before, from across the street, sitting in that truck. He'd taken it on a gas station phone he bought with cash. Because that's what a man does when he's building a door he can lock behind himself. He took a picture of my truck at her house to have something on me. He set that up first, before he ever knocked, and I said it out loud in that booth. I said, you had it in your pocket before you ever went up her steps. And Dale looked at me, and he didn't say no. And then I asked the last question, the only one left. I said, how did my wife get that phone? And he put both hands flat on that table, and he said, because I gave it to her. November of 2004, 2 weeks after we buried my father. He came to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, because he knew my schedule the way he knew everything about me, and I wasn't home, and Diane was. And he sat at my kitchen table, and he showed my wife a photograph of my truck at a dead woman's house at midnight, and he cried. And he told her he'd found the phone in the shop, in my desk. And he told her he didn't know what to do, because he loved me. Because he'd loved me since we were 19, and he told her he'd never tell a soul, and then he gave it to her. He put it in her hands. You see it? Do you see what he did? He didn't just point at me. He gave her the weapon. He made her the one holding it. Because a woman who's holding it is a woman who has to decide every single day, forever, whether to use it. And a woman deciding that every day for 22 years is a woman who will never, ever go to the police. Because going to the police means her kids find out, means her house comes down, means she was married to it. He didn't frame me for one night. He built a room around my wife, and he handed her the only key and told her it was for her own good. And every Sunday for 22 years, he came and had coffee with me. And I said, why'd you keep coming? And he said, quiet, into the table. Because if I stopped, you'd have known something was wrong. 30 years of Sundays. 30 years of the best friendship of my life. Maintenance. That's all it was. Same as changing a filter. And that's when I took the recorder out of my pocket and set it on the table between the coffees. And I hit stop. And I want to tell you about his face. Because I'd waited 44 years to see something true on it, and I finally did. He wasn't angry. He was small. That's the only way I can say it. He got small in that booth. And he said, Ray. And I said, don't. And I stood up, and I put a 5 on the table, because I was buying, because he got it last week. And I said the only thing I had left. I said, my father called you the other one for 6 years. He never did learn your name. And I walked out. Diane's car was in the driveway when I got home. She was early. Of course she was early. She'd heard my voice on that phone Friday night, and she'd been coming home fast ever since. She was standing in the kitchen with her coat still on. And the drawer was on the bed upstairs. She'd seen it. And she looked at me, and her mouth was going, and nothing came out. 30 years, and I'd never once seen that woman lost for a word. And I didn't say anything either. I just took the manila envelope out of my jacket, and I put it on the table. And she opened it. And she read a nursing home check sheet from October 22nd, 2004, 11 p.m., son at bedside, and midnight, son at bedside. And that woman went down, right there on my kitchen floor. Her knees just quit. And I got down on that floor with her, and I held my wife of 30 years while she made a sound I hope you never hear come out of somebody you love. And she said it over and over. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ray, I'm so sorry. And she told me all of it on the floor. She said she'd never believed it. Not really. She said she'd known for 22 years that I was in that room because she knew me. Because a man who drives 90 miles twice a week for 11 weeks does not stop and kill somebody on a Friday. But she said, and God, this is the true thing. This is the thing nobody tells you. She said, I couldn't get to 100, 99. Every day for 22 years, she got to 99, and that last 1% is where she lived. That's why she never slept before me. Not fear, watching. 22 years of a woman lying in the dark next to a man, keeping vigil over the 1%, refusing to let it win. And I said, why didn't you ask me? And she said, because if I asked you and you said no, I'd have had to decide if I believed you. And if I didn't, I'd have lost you. And if I did, and I was wrong, she never finished it. And then she got up, and she went out to the car, and she came back with her suitcase, and she opened it right there on the kitchen floor, And under the clothes, in a freezer bag, was a flat rectangle wrapped in old brown tape. She cut it open with the kitchen scissors and put it in my hands. And it was a mileage log. My mileage log. Truck 2, 2004. Except it wasn't. It was a copy, pages torn out of a real one and taped back into a different cover, out of order. And I opened it to October, and there was an entry on the 22nd in the hand I now knew like my own. And this one didn't say shop, no runs. This one said Ashford, service call. He'd made 2. He'd written a lie in my real book, up in that attic, the boring one, the one that never make anybody look twice. And he'd made a second book with a different lie in it, and he gave that one to my wife. Because if she ever cracked, if she ever went to a lawyer or a cop or a priest, that's what she'd hand them. My handwriting on the cover, my name on the door of the truck, me and Ashford on the night that woman died, and it would have fallen apart in 10 minutes in front of anybody who ever checked a real record, because he'd never seen a nursing home check sheet. He never knew about Ruth Ann. He never knew a woman named Marguerite kept every box in a basement since 1998, and that a man could walk in 22 years later and be found. He hadn't built a case. He built a scarecrow. And it had worked on my wife for 22 years. Because she loved me too much to walk up to it and touch it, and I sat on my kitchen floor holding both books, the real lie and the fake one. And that's what I brought to the Ashford Police Department the next morning. Both books, in 2 hands, and a recorder in my shirt pocket, and 3 pages from Riverbend, and an 81-year-old woman 6 blocks off Fenwick who'd been ready for 22 years. They opened it in 9 days. I'm going to be honest with you about the ending, because I think you've earned honest, and because the movies lie about this part, there was no trial. He pled. 14 months after that morning in Duffy's, in a courtroom in Ashford with maybe 11 people in it, Dale stood up in a suit I'd seen him wear at my daughter's wedding and said the word guilty out loud to involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. 11 years. He's 65 now. So, you do the math the way I do the math, at 3 a.m, every so often. And I'll tell you what nobody warned you about. I didn't feel good. I stood up in that courtroom and I felt nothing, and I went out to my car and sat in the parking lot, and the thing I finally felt, and I'm ashamed of it, and I'm telling you anyway, was lonely. Because I'd just watched them take away the man I'd talked to every Sunday for 30 years. And there is no word for that. There's no card you can buy for that. Marlene didn't know. I need to say that because people always ask. She'd been married to him for 38 years, and she didn't know, and she's had to live in this town ever since, and my Diane brings her casserole every couple weeks, and they sit in that kitchen, and neither one of them ever says his name. 2 women who lost the same man in 2 different directions. Aaron and Kyle know now, all of it. That was the hardest week of my life, harder than the booth, harder than the courtroom, sitting my grown kids down and telling them what their godfather was. Aaron didn't speak to me for 4 days. Not because she blamed me, because she couldn't hold it and look at me at the same time, and she needed to hold it first. She came back around. She always does. She brings Owen over on Saturdays, and he's 4 now, and he tears through this house like weather. And Wilma Dunleavy died last spring. 82. But she got 14 months. 14 months of it being true out loud, in a courtroom, with a judge saying her daughter's name and the word victim in the same sentence. 14 months of not being the crazy old woman who kept calling the police department about a fall. I sat with her twice. She showed me pictures. Nora had a laugh that took over her whole face. And Cassie, the little girl on the porch, the one with the bike, she's 29 now. She lives in Columbus. She's a dental hygienist, which I don't think is an accident, do you? She wrote me a letter after the sentencing. I keep it in my sock drawer, right where the other card used to be, which I burned, by the way, in a coffee can in my backyard, and stood there and watched it until there was nothing left. Her letter's got one line in it. I'd trade a lot of things to have never needed. She wrote, "Thank you for fixing the drawer. Now, Diane." That was the real work. That was the hard part, and I won't pretty it up. There were months in there that were ugly. There was a stretch where I couldn't look at her without seeing 22 years of a woman deciding every night whether I was a murderer. And she had to sit in that. She had to hear me say it. And she never once defended herself. Not one time. She just took it. We went and sat with a counselor over in Millbrook, a woman about our age, for about a year. 2 people in their 60s in folding chairs learning how to talk. That's what it came to. But here's the thing I landed on, and it took me the better part of that year. She didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because she wouldn't sell me. 22 years of a man handing her a loaded thing every day of her life and saying, use it, it's for your own good, and she never did. She never told her sister. She never told her mother. She never told a lawyer. She looked at 99% and a suitcase full of doubt, and she chose me every single day, 12,000 nights in a row. Most men go their whole lives and never get chosen once like that. She sleeps first now. That's how I know we're okay. About 8 months after the courtroom, I came up from turning the lights off, and my wife was already asleep. Just out. Face down in the pillow, mouth open, dead to the world. First time in 30 years. And I stood in that doorway, and I cried like a fool. We're 64 and 66 now. We sold the house on Poplar last year. Too many stairs, and honestly, that dresser and I had come to the end of the road. Little ranch out past the school now, all one level. Diane keeps saying the light's better, and every so often I catch myself going 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. That's the thing about a habit that old. It doesn't die when the man does. But I don't go to Duffy's anymore. I go up to the diner on Route 9 now, and there's a fella named Hal, retired mail carrier, been coming there since before I did. We're 4 years in. I'm not in a hurry. If this one stayed with you, and you'd like more true-to-life stories of secrets, betrayal, and the justice that finally comes, tap the video on your screen right now. I'll be waiting for you there.